Is that just because I'm a host or?
We are going live on YouTube.
I just got notification that it
Okay,
is.
great.
That's just oh, there's the Q&A.
Okay, so we're live on YouTube. And let's go find the right screen here. And we'll go start the webinar on Zoom. Okay, so we should be live on both now. Fingers crossed the technology is all working. So since we're going to give everybody a few minutes to get here, with all the technological hoo-ha, and the people in YouTube have to find the YouTube channel, which is or the YouTube stream link, which is generated once we go live. We'll give everybody a few minutes. Joe, do you want to do some owl calls to entertain everybody in the meantime?
Sure. What are we doing?
I mean, you got to do spotted owls, right?
Oh, well, of course. That's the idea here. And I hope I get it right because it's just kind of floating around in the back of my head, but oh, 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 oh. Is that close?
Emily, Daniela, I mean, as far as I'm aware, I think each subspecies is slightly different.
Yeah.
Emily's not going to
And
jump in and correct it or anything.
I'm not going to jump in and correct it. I am a lab person, so it's a bit harder for me. So I'm going in with it sounds good.
Daniela, do you want to correct it or do anything different?
I no, absolutely not. I agree. I did listen to Dave Wynn's webinar and you guys play some Spotted Owls calls then, and I do remember the that part, the what was it, like the food call, and then the female makes like a screech or something like that. So yes, I think it was good.
I don't have any of those. So that was the spotted owl.
Well, you have to
Um,
do a barred owl because we're talking about
of
barred owls
course.
also.
Yeah, so the barred owl is a much longer, more complicated call, but well, I'm gonna guess a lot of the people watching this have heard it before because it's oh, 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 oh. So that would be a male. The female would draw it out a little bit at the end, so she'll go oh, 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 oh. And I
And we can
wonder
do
if
a
my
little,
neighbor is wondering what's happening.
we can do some caterwauling. Oh, oh, oh,
Oh,
oh, oh,
oh,
oh,
oh, oh, oh, oh,
oh,
oh,
oh,
oh, oh, oh, oh, oh,
oh,
oh, oh, oh,
oh.
oh.
So that I do recognize, and I
Okay,
am going to say it's good.
that's when they get really excited. Can be good excited or bad excited, but we're excited about something.
I am not doing the whistle shriek in my apartment.
Yeah, that's probably good because it kind of sounds like a woman being murdered. At least that's what I would assume a woman being murdered sounds like, because I have not heard one, thankfully.
Well, what do you know about this, Carla?
Thank you for the clarification
Right.
on that. You have not heard this before.
I've heard the barred owl, not the woman
The
being murdered.
barred owl, I meant the woman being murdered.
Yes. Okay. Um, yeah, so those, and then barred owls also do a contact call that's just kind of a whoo, with the female being longer and the male being shorter. And anyway, any other barred owl calls you want to throw in, Joe?
I don't know if the begging call will come across, but we can try it.
Sure. It kind of cut out after the first part.
Cuts out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Zoom is really good at chopping out high-pitched owl calls, which drives us nuts. Okay,
even though I have the settings on.
right. Just a little by way of background, literally on my background, because if you've watched these webinars before, I have not had bite gear behind me. So I and Joe are here from the International Owl Center, which is located in southeast Minnesota, right in the toe by Iowa and Wisconsin. And it's a town of less than 1,000 people, which is not where you would expect an International Owl Center. We currently operate out of an old department store that was built in 1902, I think. And it's got one acoustic space, and we're open to the public, so we can't do webinars there. We used to do them in what we call the Owl House. So we've bought property, 4.5 acres at the edge of town, where we're going to build a proper facility where the owls can live on site, and we have actually a room for doing this. And there were houses there. One of them was built, I think, in 1875, wasn't in great shape, so we used it for webinars. The last year, the water stopped working because it was never connected to city water, and it only had a Sandpoint well that died. And since then, we've removed all the old buildings on site, so we don't have that anymore. So thankfully, one of the awesome businesses across the street from the Owl Center is Owl City Cycles. Kind of a nod to the Owl Center being across the street for them, and they're closed for the winter. So they said, oh, you can use our space. So we're super thankful that they're letting us use their space. It's an awesome little place, and obviously cool logo with the owl on it. They don't have an online store, but I asked because I know somebody's going to say, oh my gosh, I want to buy some of their cool stuff. So you can email Derek Wallace, who's the owner, and Joe put his email address in our chat in Zoom, and somebody should be putting it in the chat on the YouTube channel. He's got cool gear. Like, this is a water bottle holder. Like, I know you all want this. It's so cool. It's metal even. There's decals. He's got coffee mugs, water bottles, hootin' and scootin' since 2024. Shirts, normal t-shirts. It's got caps, and he's got bicycles and all kinds of normal things you'd expect here. But yay, thank you for Owl City Cycles for letting us do webinars here this winter. Okay, hopefully everybody has arrived by now. We have had, last I checked, over 350 people sign up for this webinar from at least 17 different countries and 38 different states. So awesome to have a really good audience for this. Because this is a really difficult topic, and there is a lot to understand when it comes to barred owls and spotted owls. And there's pretty much no way you're going to completely understand this if you're just watching the media or reading what's in the paper. There's just so much to this. So I'm very thankful that all of you have considered it important enough to learn more and be here, because some people don't want to learn more. We really appreciate when people do want to learn more and understand what's going on and be able to ask questions of the experts in the field who are doing the work on this. And also thank you to everybody that is supporting this with their donations, because we really want to keep this free so everybody has the opportunity to learn, no matter what their income is, or if they're in another country that has a currency that's not worth much compared to the US. We just feel like this is really important information for everybody to have who wants it. So super thank you to everybody that made donations so that we can help keep this free. Huge thanks to Dr. Daniela Arenas and Dr. Emily Fountain for giving their time on a Sunday afternoon to share their expertise with us, because they know a lot of stuff from a really different angle than most of us have been hearing about. A little bit of logistics before I give you full background on those two. This will be saved to YouTube. So if you miss it, or if you have to cut out, or if you want to share it with a friend, it will be on the Owl Center's YouTube channel after this. We will have about an hour for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So you can put your questions, if you're in Zoom, put it in the Q&A, which hopefully is somewhere down on the bottom there. I'm not seeing the Q&A. Oh, there it is. Duh. Too many things they add to Zoom these days. So put your questions in the Q&A if you're in Zoom. If you're in YouTube, keep the chat, which is enabled on YouTube, but chat is disabled on Zoom. Keep the chat in YouTube on topic, and you can put your questions in there. And we've got some of our chat room moderators, including special guest, Tristan Williams from the Scottish Owl Center, in the YouTube room. I believe he usually goes by Owly Keep. He can answer some basic questions, and then he'll forward YouTube questions to me on my phone, and we'll get those looped into the huge Q&A at the end of the presentation. Okay, a little bit of background about our two awesome speakers. Emily Fountain, oh my gosh, has a PhD in evolutionary biology from Lincoln University in New Zealand, and where she studied entomology and said she actually did research on an extinct weevil that clearly wasn't actually extinct because she was studying it still. She's a research scientist and molecular laboratory director at the Peary Wildlife Ecology and Conservation Lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research uses genomics to understand historical and recent changes in all three of the subspecies of the spotted owl. She uses genomics to study the barred owl to understand its success in the Pacific Northwest, and has also studied marble murrelet diet, dispersal in sloths, climate adaptation in turtles, and orangutan and great ape conservation. So she's got a really wide background. And Dr. Daniela Arenas has a PhD in biology from Texas Tech. She's also a researcher at the Peary Lab at UW-Madison, and she uses molecular approaches to understand patterns of speciation, diversification, and evolution, and has worked with neotropical rodents to look at taxonomic status, phylogeography, population structure, and evolution. And she's currently working on a barred owl diet study in both the native and the invasive range. And fun fact, she's actually described a new species of bat in South America. So thank you for sharing your wonderful expertise with us, and I will turn it over to you two.
All right, let me just share my screen here. You guys have to look at my bunny for a brief moment. Okay, so thank you, Carla, very much for inviting Daniela and I to speak today. And also thank you to everyone who has joined in to listen to our talk on spotted owls and barred owls. So Daniela and I are part of Dr. Zach Peary's lab, which uses a combination of both field ecology and genomics for the conservation of owls. In my role as the head of the genomics lab with Daniela as a key member in that lab, we strive to provide strategies that enhance the knowledge of those doing the field ecology and ecological modeling. It's important to mention that with our genomics work, it is not feasible without contributions from people in the Peary lab and beyond. A lot of our work does rely on rehab centers. The International Owl Center and Carla have been key to helping us out with our work. Museums, and also we a lot of times collaborate with members of the public. So genetics plays a really important role in conservation, and sometimes that is overlooked because it's perceived to have gaps in how it can inform conservation management, because it's often considered something that does not provide immediate solutions. But it can actually really play a key role in that anything from identification of species, from illegal trade, to even be able to run any healthy captive rearing program by identifying related individuals or hybrids, genetics is definitely a major part of conservation management, along with the field ecology and modeling. So on to our talk today. We're going to present this as two different vignettes. The first one is going to touch on the population genomics study that we conducted on the 3 subspecies of spotted owl. And when we looked at how their populations have changed over time and how current anthropogenic changes are affecting these populations today. And then Daniela will do the second half of our talk, where we will talk about the newest threat to spotted owls, which is the native invader, the barred owl. So as the title of our talk does state, We are in the Anthropocene epoch, which is basically the time when humans are making changes to the planet that are having detrimental impacts. So these changes, as we know, are resulting in losses of biodiversity worldwide and also species extinction. And our focal species for this part is it has not escaped the impacts of the Anthropocene. And today, as I mentioned, we're talking about all three subspecies for this part, which have faced population declines. All three subspecies of spotted owl are old growth specialists. They are montane species, and all of them are cold adapted. And the spotted owl speciated in the Pleistocene. And then the three subspecies speciated from each other about 15,000 years ago before present. The northern spotted owl ranges from the British Columbia in Canada down into Northern California, the United States, where in the northern portion of California, it does meet with the California spotted owl, which is only found in California, and where northern spotted and California spotted owl ranges overlap, they are known to hybridize and they can produce viable offspring. California spotted owls are found in two different places of California, one throughout the more continuous forested habitat of the Sierra Nevada mountains, and around the Central Coast and in Southern California, they inhabit what's often referred to as sky islands. As you can see in the map here where we zoomed in Southern California, the range looks like kind of disconnected little circles, and that's because sky islands means that they're inhabiting a suitable habitat at the top of the mountains, which are separated by canyons and other areas of not as suitable habitat. And Mexican spotted owls, which are the smallest of the subspecies and are found in the southwest of the United States and continue south into Mexico. In the southwest, they are also in sky islands, just like the California spotted owl in Southern California. And they are perhaps the least studied of all three subspecies. So the threats to spotted owls, as a lot of people may have heard, and it started with logging and the timber wars in the Pacific Northwest and the Southwest, which landed both the northern and Mexican spotted owl on the United States endangered species list. And now there are more impacts to spotted owls with high severity wildfires, climate change, which warming climate is not great for cold adapted species, drought, urbanization, contaminants on the landscape, and the more emergent threat, which is the invasive barred owl. So spotted owl populations have been in decline since the past century. And for this part of the talk, we are going to go into the population genomics of spotted owls. And we wanted to understand how historical climatic processes and recent anthropogenic changes are impacting spotted owl populations. And we were hoping to aim for main questions about this using genomics. And when you are using genomics to understand historical processes, so we're talking about time from when they speciated into the Pleistocene to the Holocene, it really helps put into context what's happening in recent times here with changes in their population. So understanding how spotted owls, which are cold adapted species, how their population sizes shifted during the Pleistocene, during that ice age time, and how their populations responded to the warming at the onset of the Holocene can help put into perspective the degree of population decline in recent times, as well as help understand how adaptable spotted owls may be to changing environments. Before I go too much into my talk, I'm not going to focus a lot on the methods and details. I'm always happy to talk about genetics methods, but we are under some time constraints here, so I can talk about that at a later time. Therefore, I'm going to give you just a brief background on the genetic concepts that I'm going to be talking about, and kind of the assumptions behind some of the ones that I will be using. So affected population size does not measure the actual census population, but instead it provides an estimate of how the population size has changed based on changes in genetic variation and how this shifts from what's considered an ideal population. So an ideal population has a lot of assumptions and requirements to it, which are not really met in a normal situation of wildlife. So that's kind of how we are able to see how these populations are changing from that ideal. However, when you are calculating affected population size, you are taking some assumptions in, and that is that you do not have a small census population, you do not have much inbreeding going on or sex bias, and as you will see in my results, this did become an impact on some of the populations I was looking at, because it is difficult to meet those assumptions when you are working with endangered species. So for this work, as I mentioned, we looked at all three subspecies, but for northern spotted owl, we looked at one population from Northern California. For California spotted owl, we did capture their full continuous range. So we sampled all down the Sierra Nevada mountains, and we were able to get one central coastal population of Carmel Valley, as well as spread throughout their range in Southern California. And for Mexican spotted owls, we looked at their range in 2 states, New Mexico and Utah. And I have here that Mexican spotted owls, you'll see a note where it's genetically in one population, and the same for part of Southern California. And I will explain what I mean by that in my next slide. So in this slide, this is the results from asking our first question about, is there population structure going on in spotted owls? And that answer is definitely yes, there is. So for interpreting these figures that I'm showing, the individual bars represent the individual owl that we sampled. And each of these colors don't represent the geographic population, but they actually represent a genetic population that we estimated. So in the gray at the top, you can see where I filled in what our geographic population was. And in the different colors, we're looking at genetic population. And what we can see with California spotted owls, that is in the Sierra Nevada, across that more continuous habitat, they're mostly all one color, suggesting that this is genetically a single population. However, when we get to that Southern California range, with Carmel Valley, and also looking particularly at places like Sierra Pelona, they are coming out as their own distinct genetic population. And then this is when we look at Mexican spotted owl, and to kind of reference back to when I was saying there's these sky islands for Southern California and Mexican spotted, we would think that we would see a similar pattern of this more genetic populations and separation, because they're inhabiting these mountaintops with not as great habitat in between, so they aren't able to disperse between as easily. But with Mexican spotted, one of the biggest differences that we saw with population structure is actually by geographic. So Utah samples were all grouping together, and they were different in genetic population than our New Mexico samples. And we actually saw that although there is some genetic structuring by population, there's also a lot of admixture and gene flow going on in Mexican spotted owl. So when we look at these past demographics I was talking about, so how populations are changing from that ice age of the Pleistocene up to that onset of the warming in the Holocene, we created figures of the effective population size from our analyses. And here for northern spotted owl, we're showing that when it speciated back in the Pleistocene up to the last glacial maxima into the Holocene, so that cold period, it experienced a population expansion. So the population got bigger. However, when that warming hit of the Holocene, glaciers started to retreat, northern spotted owls experienced a population crash. The pattern is somewhat similar in California spotted owls, except their expansion started right when that last glacial maximum occurred, so that last coldest period, but they did start to decline a bit prior to the onset of the Holocene. And at that start of the Holocene, they were at their lowest effective population size and started to decline more. When we look at Mexican spotted owl, though, the pattern is kind of different, which is something we weren't fully expecting because we figured these are cold adapted species. They were all going to behave the same. But Mexican spotted owl actually experienced a crash in effective population size at the last glacial maximum. And then it expanded again until the Holocene, which a little bit after the onset of the Holocene, it once again experienced a population decline. So we used a second type of analyses to try and be able to determine what was happening in more recent time. And so with these types of analyses, we can estimate up to about probably the last 1,000 years before present, to determine what the effective population size looks like. And you will see that we don't have Southern California spotted owls on here. And that's mainly because with that population size, how I mentioned before, they're really sensitive to that. Small population, these type of analyses, and inbreeding, we weren't able to estimate that for Southern California. But both northern spotted and California spotted in the Sierras, after that crash in the warming of the Holocene, their populations did increase and they became more stable up until the last 1,000 years. Mexican spotted owls did also have an increase in population size, but within the last 1,000 years, they are showing a decline again. So what this kind of means is the response of northern spotted owls and California spotted owls to the Pleistocene ice age and the last glacial maximum, when their populations were experiencing an increase, is what we would expect from a cold adapted species. There's more habitat that's suitable for them at lower elevations. However, that warming of the Holocene, especially with northern spotted, caused a crash in the population. And that's most likely because temperatures became warm, spotted owl populations declined, and they eventually had to track up to higher elevation to where it was colder. And there they could expand their populations again. And for Mexican spotted owl, with that kind of different pattern we saw, we think this might have to do with different vegetation changes during the Pleistocene and into the Holocene. So this figure that's showing on the right has vegetation changes that were experienced in Western North American forests from at that onset of the Holocene into current. And what it's basically saying is that vegetation experienced a lot of fluctuation at the onset of the Holocene, with a lot of species extinctions and turnovers and changes in species richness. So that habitat that spotted owls were relying on was changing drastically at the onset of the Holocene. And interestingly, when they estimate to current time in the Anthropocene, they are showing that that same type of changes in vegetation are also occurring. So in the next section of our talk, I'm going to be talking about two main things: isolation by distance, which is the simple concept that if you are geographically separated, you're going to have less gene flow because it's harder for individuals to disperse. So on this picture, the Sierra Nevada with the 3 L's, the blue owl is in the northern Sierra Nevada. It's going to be more closely related to the purple owl because it's easier for it to disperse to and from the middle of the Sierras, and less genetically related to the red owl because that's just such a longer distance for it to go. With FST, this is another metric of looking at how different populations are from each other. And so when measuring FST, the ideal is that at 0, there's no differentiation, which means that your populations look identical genetically. But at 1, it means they are completely different from each other genetically. And in our analyses with the type of marker we use, they're referred to as SNPs, they change and mutate at a very slow rate. And so when we talk about things like a FST of 0.2, this means that there actually is a lot of genetic differentiation occurring. And just to put this more in a conservation context for you, when you have things like a high genetic diversity, connected populations, so individuals are able to breed freely, it often means that there's a higher adaptive capacity of that population. And so that population should have higher resilience to changes in the environment and potentially benefits for long-term survival. But when you have low genetic diversity and these populations can't exchange any gene flow, you can have low resilience, and that capacity to adapt to changes can be low, and it can mean there's a weak potential for long-term survival. So looking at our pairwise FST, California spotted owl by population, remember I said 0.2 is high? Well, one of our populations, like Sierra Pelona in Southern California, is showing rates of above 0.3 with other populations in Southern California. And these are geographically populations that are extremely close to each other. In contrast, Mexican spotted owl, which is also in these sky islands, just like Southern California, the largest FST value is only 0.09. And that is between Utah and the furthest geographically separated population in New Mexico. And what we kind of thought at first is these FST values might reflect what you would expect of these sky island habitats, but it seems like there's definitely something else going on in Southern California since these FST values were so drastically high. When we looked at genetic diversity, results were not as surprising. Previous studies had shown that genetic diversity is quite low in spotted owls, and that's the same across what we found in our study. To put that in a little bit of perspective for you, a study done by Cho et al. In 2019 looked at genetic diversity in 25 raptors. Northern spotted owl came in at the lowest genetic diversity of those 25 raptors. And California spotted owl and Mexican spotted owl are even lower than the northern spotted owl. And as I pointed out before, low genetic diversity could potentially lead to low adaptive capacity. Story gets kind of sad once we get into inbreeding values. So when you're looking at a wild population, an inbreeding value of 0.05 is normally considered a healthy population. We look at the Sierras for California spotted owl, or we look at northern spotted owl, and those are looking rather healthy. But once we get into Southern California, the situation becomes a lot worse. So a lot of our values are pushing close to 0.5. And to put that into perspective for you, an inbreeding coefficient of 0.5 tends to represent 3 consecutive generations of full sibling mating. And this inbreeding was actually verified by field work done by others in our lab. And so Josh Berry, who conducted a study in Southern California, found a mating pair and they had a nest of juveniles. When we got the samples from those in the lab, we did a parentage test, and it turned out that it was a father-daughter pair that was mating and had a nest. So it kind of verifies that these types of inbreeding are happening in Southern California. When we look at isolation by distance, like I said, we're expecting that if you're more geographically separated, you're going to be less genetically related. With both Sierra Nevada, California spotted, and with Mexican spotted, we are seeing that pattern. Mexican spotted owls, although it's really hard to tell on this graph because Southern California spotted owls kind of threw off how it came out. That line is slightly more inclined, which is kind of what we would expect with those sky islands. So there is a small limit to the way the gene flow is occurring between each of these sky islands. However, Southern California has a completely different thing going on. These populations are geographically very close to each other, but they are extremely different genetically, which means there's almost no gene flow occurring between these populations. And given that different pattern compared to Mexican spotted owls, this is most likely is not due to a sky island habitat. Instead, is probably due to anthropogenic changes to the landscape. So we're showing a aerial map shot from some of the places where we sampled. So on the top would be for Mexican spotted owl, and in the red is urban areas. But on the bottom is Southern California. And as you can see, the amount of urban spread from Los Angeles is huge, and it is spreading out through all of these sky islands that are being inhabited by Southern California spotted owls, suggesting that this may have an impact of making it even more difficult for these owls to disperse between these sky islands. And this result has really been supported by a lot of good fieldwork that's been done by others in the Peary lab. For example, Dr. Doug Temple did ecological modeling from Southern California back in 2022 and found that there's a 52% decline in spotted owl occupancy and also an increase in territory extinction. Dr. Josh Berry conducted another study, and actually all of our samples that we use in our genomic study came from his work. And he found that in San Bernardino National Forest, which is considered the healthiest population of Southern California spotted owls, had a decline of 52% in territory occupancy. And in the Cleveland National Forest, it was 71% decline in occupancy. And just to draw a bit more attention to the work that Josh did, because it's so key to our work, he surveyed 13 historical spotted owl territories, which are these purple dots here. And out of those 13, 3 represented by these black dots were still occupied. Next, he visually identified a total of 8 currently occupied territories marked with the green dots. Out of those 8 territories, he found that that 5 were occupied by pairs of owls and only 3 were occupied by a single owl. He observed that 4 out of the 5 pairs did have juveniles roosting with them. And among the 5 pairs detected, 3 were located in the Los Padres National Forest. And that forest is where we saw Sierra Pelona, which had the highest FST values and genetic isolation out of all the other populations we looked at. He did not find any pairs in the San Gabriel Mountains, and altogether, he only observed 21 owls during his 6 months of intensive field surveys conducted in Southern California. And I want to really draw your attention to the impact that urbanization is probably having on Southern California spotted owls. So in this video, we can see how LA has expanded over time. The white lines coming in are rail lines that expanded, and you'll start to see yellow lines coming in, which represents the roads and highways. And as you can see from the mountain habitat, LA over the years is rapidly expanding further and further into these mountains, causing more isolation between these sky islands for spotted owls. And so to bring it back to the slide that I was showing you before about the high genetic diversity, connected population versus low genetic diversity in isolated populations, all 3 subspecies are showing low genetic diversity. Population isolation, although we couldn't measure that with northern spotted owl because we only had a single population we tested. It's both low and high in California, but low in Mexican spotted. Same pattern with inbreeding. And when those warming temperatures occurred in the Holocene for cold adapted species, we were seeing population contractions in Northern California, northern spotted owls and California spotted owls, which is really important to point out, given that with climate change, the temperatures are drastically increasing above the threshold that spotted owls can tolerate. Isolation by distance, we did see a pattern in the Sierras for California spotted owl and also for Mexican spotted owl. And that kind of points to, if we look at the figure again, they have low genetic diversity, but right now the populations are not as isolated. And particularly with Mexican spotted owl, which lives in those sky islands like California, the California spotted owl in Southern California, if the habitat continues to be fragmented and if urbanization spreads, wildfires spread, there's a good chance that this subspecies and even the Sierra Nevada subspecies, they will possibly become isolated populations, and their resilience and ability to adapt to changes in the future are going to be greatly reduced. The situation gets really sad when we look at Southern California. The population isolation was the highest. Inbreeding was just extreme. It was excessive. The isolation by distance, yes and no. They do show some separation like a sky island, but it definitely was well beyond that of what we would expect from sky islands, to the point that this is most likely caused by things like urbanization and amplified by other things like wildfires going on in Southern California. And as I mentioned when we were looking at Josh's work, that San Bernardino is considered the healthiest population in Southern California. However, the inbreeding was 0.4 in San Bernardino. And that instance of a known parent-offspring mating was observed in San Bernardino. So although that population is considered healthy, it definitely is not looking that way when we look at the genetics. So overall, what we are concluding is that particularly in Southern California, the populations of spotted owls are definitely at risk of becoming functionally extinct. So with that, I am going to pass the talk off onto Daniela, who is now going to talk about a new threat on the landscape to spotted owls, which is the barred owl.
All right. Thank you, Emily. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Um, Full disclosure, if I suddenly mute myself, it is because I am fighting a cough and I will be needing to cough. So, but I'll be back. All right. So, as Emily just mentioned, I will be talking about the barred owl in Western United States. But today I've decided to start sort of at the end of the story in a way, because the first thing that I want to bring to your attention is the management strategy that the United States Fish and Wildlife Service proposed to manage barred owls in this area. And so the plan proposes the lethal removal of up to 500,000 barred owls over the span of 30 years in the states of California, Oregon, and Washington combined. Now, keep in mind that this proposal is based on experiments conducted in the field, surveys done over decades, and so it's not coming from just anywhere. This has data to back it up. But as many of you may know, and some of you may imagine, many people did not like the proposal. And animal rights groups and the public in general strongly opposed this proposal. The controversy got so big that pretty much every major news outlet in the country had an opinion piece on it. And so, uh, but let's think a little, or let's talk a little bit about what is it that the people against it were using as reasons to not agree with this proposal. So perhaps one of the most prominent ones is the idea that because barred owls are native to part of the continent, in this case, Eastern North America, they are not invasive species. They are simply expanding the range, and therefore they should not be managed like an invasive species. Others criticize the plan because it is too expensive or it is not practical. It won't work at large scales. It won't work if there's a high density of barred owls. And there's some people that think that we should just let nature run its course. And so these are two owl species that are closely related to each other. They both belong to the same genus. And well, if one ends up replacing the other one on the landscape, it should be fine, right? Nothing bad is gonna happen. So what I want to do with the rest of the talk is I want to give you data. I want to give you results of the type of work that we've been doing in our lab, and then I want you to form an opinion yourselves. So the first thing we're going to tackle is what's considered an invasive species. And unfortunately, in invasion biology, the terminology associated with it is extensive, is confusing, is misleading. It changes constantly depending on the system, the researcher. There's just no consensus. And so, for the purpose of this talk, we are going to think of invasive species in terms of their impact and not just their origin. And so most people will agree that if a species that does not occur naturally in an area has been moved there by human agency, whether on purpose or not, we can call that an introduced species, right? It was introduced by humans into this new area. We also call those exotics. But generally, these species are not going to have a negative impact on the ecosystem. They are able to have viable populations, but they have no effect. If an introduced species starts having negative impacts, whether they're ecological or economic, that's when we call them invasive. That's when they have turned invasive. So let's get back to the barred owl. So as I mentioned earlier, the barred owl is native to part of the continent. So here on the map, highlighted in blue, are the Great Plains. And then to the right of that, in eastern North America, that's where barred owls were distributed. And for the longest time, well, most of their history really, the Great Plains serve as a barrier. So barred owls are associated with forests. They are a forest species. Now, they're a little bit more generalist in that they are not all growth obligates like spotted owls. So pretty much any forest will do for them. But the Great Plains serve as a barrier because these were treeless areas. Keep also in mind that barred owls are slightly larger than spotted owls, about 5 to 10%. They are generally predators, so they eat more species than we know spotted owls do, and they are also territorial. So, with barred owls, the whole idea as to whether they were introduced or moved by humans, the lines get a little blurry because, yes, they were not moved by humans, they flew themselves to the Western United States and North America, but they were able to do so because of human action. And so what happened is that we lost those barriers to for the barred owls. And so here in this map, you can see in the 1800s how the Great Plains looked like. They were grasslands, they were treeless areas, they were serving as a barrier. Now, with European settlement and with the construction of towns, cities, crops, livestock, all of these modifications to this landscape, this is how the Great Plains look like when spotted owls started moving west. And as you can see, they are highly modified. Also, it could be that, excuse me, changes in climate have facilitated the use of boreal forest in Canada by barred owls. And so these are all changes associated with human action, even if the humans did not transport the owls per se. So how does this invasion look like? So barred owls, excuse me, of course, there we go. So barred owls move west through Canada, and then they started moving south along the west coast from British Columbia in Canada into Washington, Oregon, and more recently California. And at this point, barred owls in their expanded range completely overlap with the range of northern spotted owl and to an extent with the range of California spotted owl. Yes. So what happens when these barred owls made it onto the West Coast? Well, we already know that spotted owls were not doing great. They were already in low numbers in their populations because of past threats that Emily talked about. And now you have these generalist owl coming in, generalist both in habitat and diet, so they can survive pretty much on any forest and they can survive off of many food items. And they are also territorial, and because they're larger, they are capable of displacing spotted owls out of their territories. The other big issue is that barred owls are able to live more closely together, so to speak. And so on the landscape, one territory that will usually hold only one pair of spotted owls can instead hold about 4 to 6 pairs of barred owls. And so, as you can imagine, once barred owls make it onto the landscape, they inundate that landscape. And so, what does that mean for spotted owls? Well, we know there has been work done in the field by other researchers, and Dave Wins in a webinar a couple of years back talked about this as well. But ever since the timber wars, there have been surveys on the field of spotted owl territories, right? And so researchers knew where these territories were. And as the years went by, what they started to see is that territories that usually had spotted owls started getting occupied by barred owls, one or more pairs. And so at the end of these surveys, after about 20 years, you can see here, and I'm gonna use a pointer here. So there are these locations in Washington, Oregon, and California. And you can see that in Washington and Oregon, the occupancy of northern spotted owl here in purple keeps lowering and lowering as time goes by to the point that it gets really close to zero. And so what this means is that these populations are about to, if not already, been extirpated from these areas. And this is happening as the occupancy of barred owls in yellow increases. So there is a clear relationship between these two things. Now, when we look at California, you can see that occupancy of spotted owls is not that low, is not that close to zero, but is clearly declining. So basically give it some time without doing anything about it, and you're gonna see the same that you're seeing in Oregon and Washington. And so at this point in the United States, and I'm gonna be using these terms from now on, we consider Washington and Oregon the established range of the invasion, and this has to do with the density of spotted owls that are in these areas, which is extremely high. Whereas California, we consider it the leading edge of the invasion because densities are lower and they are literally actively still moving. They're still moving south. They're still invading more and more areas of California. So in our lab, we were interested in also asking some other questions that go beyond occupancy, presence, absence. We wanted to understand what other aspects might be affecting the occupancy of spotted owls, how barred owls play into this, and because at this point we're interested in both barred and spotted owls, the traditional monitoring efforts of playing calls in the field to try to identify where the owls are wasn't going to work that well, because if you play a lot of barred owl calls, then spotted owl calls are going to get suppressed. And so you're not going to be able to figure out where they are. So instead, our lab decided to go with bioacoustics. And so how does this work? This is really good and has so much potential. And so what happens is that in the field, these autonomous recording units, or ARUs, like this one right here, they get deployed in the field. And so you can see on this graph in the middle that we started this on the northern Sierra Nevada in California. And the landscape gets divided into these polygons, and they are roughly the size of a spotted owl territory. Within each of these, 1 to 4, usually 2 ARUs get deployed, and they are basically recording any and all vocalizations that are happening in that area. And this means by any bird species, not just spotted owls. And how does this look on the landscape? And I think this is extremely cool. This is what's happening now. So instead of having to send these huge crews of people to the field to try to find out barred and spotted owls, now you have these recording units doing the work for you. And so what you get back is, for any given species, you get a map with these polygons, and then you know where that species was detected or not. Okay? So with that information, then our lab has done a lot of work understanding how other things like wildfires, habitat, drought, all of these different disturbances, how are they affecting spotted owl occupancy in the Sierra Nevada? But there is something else we can do with this data, with this bioacoustic data, and that is help us locate and facilitate the removal of barred owls. And so at this point, I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about these lethal removals. I know a lot of people also ask, well, why don't we try something else before we do the lethal removals? That has already been done, especially in Canada. And we know it doesn't work. And so translocating barred owls somewhere else is difficult because barred owls are hard to capture. It costs a lot of money to move them somewhere else. And because they're so territorial, many of them just fly back where you grab them from. Things like birth control also doesn't work at high densities of barred owls because the adult is still there for 20 plus years and they are still displacing spotted owls from the territory. So in reality, lethal removals are the most viable and cost-effective way to manage barred owls at this point. I also want to tell you a little bit about the people that do this work in the field. These are wildlife biologists. They are experienced people. They have been working in this system and with spotted owls for years, if not decades. And so they are so familiar with the territory and the species that there is no opportunity for there to be a mistake in which owl gets removed. Because that is one of the concerns of many people is what if you remove a spotted owl by mistake? It has not happened. In all the years that these removals have been happening in the field, that has not occurred because the people doing these removals are trained biologists. And so how does acoustic help us with this? You can see here again, we're starting at the Northern Sierras in California. The polygons painted in orange, that is when a recording unit detected a barred owl. And so after that, a remover goes to the field looking for that owl. And so they play calls, and because these are territorial animals, they are going to respond, right? And if you, in a way, keep bothering them with the calls, they're gonna get more and more aggressive and they're gonna come closer and closer. And once they're within range, they get shot with a shotgun. And so the first experiment that our lab did in the Sierras removed 74 owls in 2019. Keep in mind, this is a low density area for bar owls. So what are the results of that first experiment? Well, as you can see, before and after bar owl removal, their occupancy clearly declined, right? So 2018, no removals, 2020, removals had happened, bar owl occupancy stayed low, and you can also see that on the amount of sites that are occupied by bar owls on both years. But more importantly, what does this mean for spotted owls? Well, what the people in the lab found is that 33% of the removal sites for barred owls were recolonized by spotted owls within the same year. And 56% of those sites were recolonized by spotted owls after 1 year. Of those, only 33% had nesting pairs in it, which we will like it to be a higher number because we don't only want to stabilize spotted owl population, we want it to grow. And nesting pairs give us that. So that part was not as good, but still, there are nesting pairs in this area. So what this tells you is that barred owl removals work. They have a positive effect on spotted owls that is almost immediate. We're talking within a year, right? Now, so I just told you this is a low density area, right? And this was a small area in the Northern Sierras. And so going back to those criticisms to the proposal, what happens when we are working in areas with higher density? And what happens when we're working on a larger scale? Well, our lab also looked into that in California. And with the help of the Hoopa Valley tribe and timber companies, over 3,000 barred owls were removed from the areas in the map, most of them since 2022. Up to this point, a lot of removal work has been done in Oregon, Washington, and part of California by other researchers like Dave Wins, but this is more recent work done in California. And just like the work done by then, there was one of these sites that served as a control. And so what that means is that no bar owls were removed there. So what are the results of that? So here I want you to, well, let's first understand the different population types. So here the first one is the control, so no removals happen here. Hoopa and green diamond are considered high density of barred owls. SPI medium and then Marin and Lassen are the very, very edge of this invasion. So you can see Marin on the west coast and then Lassen in the Sierra. So this is the very edge. So this is low density. And what you can see here is that once those removals start, the occurrence of barred owl decreases immediately, like it's extremely obvious even at high densities. But more importantly, the occurrence of spotted owls stabilizes in all of these sites, regardless of the density of barred owls. When you look at the control, if you don't do anything, if you do not remove barred owls, what happens is that barred owl occurrence increases, as we've seen before, and spotted owl occurrence decreases rapidly. And so this tells you that, once again, these removals of barred owls work, and they are possible at larger scales and at a higher density. Excuse me. Is this a lot of work? Yes. Is it gonna cost a lot of money? Yes. And time? Also yes. But it does work. Okay? Before I move on to what we've been doing at the genomics lab with barred owls, I want to give you a last snapshot of what the invasion of barred owls looks like. So this right here, every blue dot is a barred owl on the landscape. And as you can see, in yellow is the range of the northern spotted owl, in green is the California spotted owl, and barred owls have simply inundated the landscape in Oregon and Washington. Remember, this is our established range. And here, they outnumber spotted owls thousands to one. In the leading edge, they outnumber spotted owls by 10 or more. Still not great, but definitely better than how things are in Oregon and Washington. So up to this point, I've been talking about spotted owls, obviously, and in fact, all of the controversy we've seen regarding the management plan has been framed within that context of owl versus owl, right? So killing one owl to save another one. But we know that with invasive species, their impacts go beyond that. And something we've been trying to do in our lab recently is understanding the broader impacts that barred owls have on the ecosystem. So here you can see pictures of barred owl ingesting different, or well, in this case, capturing different types of prey, and you can even see stomach contents here. And so that's what I'm gonna be talking about. But before I move into the genomics, just one more research and results from bioacoustics. As I told you, these recording units record vocalizations from all bird species. And so we can also look at the impact of barred owls on other forest owls in the area, not just spotted owl. And what Josh and collaborators found is that flammulated owls benefit also from removing barred owls from the landscape. And so this is more evidence that removing barred owls has a benefit on different species on the landscape. Now let's get into the genomics. So every single owl that gets removed in the field goes to our collaborators, Angela and Faraz, who take care of the necropsies. And from that, we get a whole suite of samples that allow us to do so much different research and answer so many different questions. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. From each owl that gets removed in the field, we get brain tissue, muscle, heart, liver, reproductive organs. We get stomach, feathers, both old and new growth, and what I'm going to be talking about, we also get intestines and more recently swabs from the talons and inside the beaks of the owls. What type of things can we do with all these? Well, many of these tissues can be used in transcriptomics, and this is the part of genomics that looks at gene expression. And so you can imagine that an invasive species that is facing all these new pressures and facing all these difficulties of trying to make it into a new territory, their bodies need to respond very fast. And each organ and each tissue is going to respond differently so it can function properly. And so looking at gene expression can tell us a lot about how is it that these owls are responding and what helps them be so efficient at this invasion, right? We can also use extracted DNA from these tissues to answer questions regarding their dispersal route and also the biogeography of it. So, was there any barriers in the landscape, if any, or did they just move without any issue? We can also use things or organs or tissues such as stomach and liver to do rodenticide screening and also test for other toxins in the environment. And lastly, we can look at diet. And so with diet metabarcoding, so some of you might be familiar with the more traditional methods of looking at diet, where you just literally look into their stomachs or their pellets and you look for these undigested remains, bones and exoskeletons and things like that, that let you characterize diet, right? Well, by using DNA, we can have a very high resolution data set. So we can identify species that do not leave remains that you can look at. And so this gives us an extremely high resolution in taxonomy. So how does that work? I'm gonna walk you through it real quick. So again, we get the intestines from the field, and we literally squeeze the contents out. And then from those contents, we extract DNA. At this point, we have both DNA from the prey items that the owl ate and the owl itself. But we're interested in the prey, right? So we need to amplify prey DNA. To do that, we use PCRs that have specific primers that target the groups that we're interested in. And so we ran 10 PCRs per each sample, per each individual owl. And we looked at other owl species, other bird species. We looked at mammals, reptiles, amphibians. We also look at invertebrates because, again, from those diet work done by Dave Wins and Ryan Bombach, we know that they are eating a lot of invertebrates in the invasive range. And so all of those PCRs get combined, and then we combine many samples, many different owls. We ended up doing hundreds of it into what we call a library. That gets sent out for sequencing, and when we get that back, we do bioinformatic processing to get DNA, our DNA sequences of the prey items that the owl ate. Now, in order to identify them, in order to put a name to it, a species name, we use a reference database. So these are publicly available sequences of prey items that we know occur in the landscape, rodents, snakes, frogs and salamanders from this whole area. And we try to match them, right? Keep in mind that we couldn't always match them with enough confidence to call a species, but we do have some of those sequences identified to genus level or family level. But many of them, we were able to identify them all the way down to species. And with that data, then you can answer a whole set of questions. So I'm going to show you some of the work we've done. The first meta barcoding work that was done by Nick and collaborators, again, in the Northern Sierras, Trinity area. And this is that first set of removals. Remember I told you about back in 2019? That's where these samples came from. And what he found, I mean, we already knew barred owls are generalists, right, in their diets. They eat a lot of things. But what's very impressive here, if you look at the diagram in B, is that on gray is the proportion of the diet that is invertebrates. And this is almost 50% of the diet. And so that is not something you expect a barred owl to be eating, right? We're talking they're filling themselves up with worms and snails and crickets. And so that was a very interesting finding. Now, building on this research, another student in the lab, Emma, just finished her master's work looking at diversity and composition of barred owl diet in the invasive and the native range. So this type of comparative work rarely gets done in diet studies. So that was very interesting. But then she also went ahead and within the invasive range, she looked at differences between the established, so remember Oregon and Washington, and the leading edge in California. And what she found, I mean, it's clear. So here on the left, we have diversity of the diets. And as much as a barred owl is a generalist predator in the native range, it is far more generalist when it comes to the invasive range. And when you look at composition, this is where it gets really, really interesting. So we know that barred owls, just like spotted owls, they relied on mammals a lot for their diet. These are nutritious meals. This is the stuff they like, right? So when you look at mammals here on the left is the results for the native owls. So yes, they are relying on mammals a lot. But as you move along the invasion, they rely on mammals less and less. And instead, they rely on other groups like birds and amphibians. And as I showed you before with Nick's work, invertebrates. And so there is definitely a difference in the composition of the diets when it comes to native versus invasive and then even within the invasive range. Now there are many hypotheses that could explain what we're seeing, and one that we think it really is working out here is what's known as the predator naivete hypothesis. And so what we're thinking is that these owls, these individuals that are at the front of the invasion, right? These individuals that are expanding the range. Give me one second. Okay, so these owls that are expanding the range, they are facing a lot of energetic requirements, right? They need to worry about moving. They need to worry about finding a new territory, and they need to worry about maintaining that territory. Because of this, they have to, and also they are in a new area that they're not familiar with. And so they cannot really spend time and energy looking for that nutritious meal that is mammals. Instead, they have to eat whatever is available. And in some instances, eat a lot of it. And so we believe that's what's happening in the invasive range. Something else that also leads us to believe that there is some naivete happening is that we are even finding toxic animals in the diet of barred owls. So there is this toxic newt in California that only gutter snakes have developed a way to eat them and like withstand the toxicity of it, but we're finding them in barred owls. And so that tells you that in a sense, they are naive to what's on this landscape. Next, we wanted to look more in detail into the actual species that are being consumed. And so we added some data from another part in Northern California. And what we found is that in their invasive range, barred owls are consuming at least 162 species of animals, both vertebrates and invertebrates. And keep in mind that here we have sort of like their latest meal, right? So this is a recent snapshot. This does not include everything else that they might be eating their whole lives. And you can see here on these graphs that we have divided the results by state. because again, we want to see if there is a difference between the established and the leading edge of the invasion. And you can see here how in Oregon and Washington, which we consider the established range, there is a larger proportion of mammals being eaten compared to California, which is our leading edge. But interestingly, amphibians are pretty much equally consumed in all areas. So they are relying on amphibian populations a lot. And this is a problem because the Pacific Northwest is one of the most diverse areas in the United States in regards to amphibians, a lot of them already threatened. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And so this is important. How much barred owls are relying on amphibians is something to keep an eye on. And so out of these 162 species, how many of them are of conservation concern? So we went ahead and looked at all the different lists, and we found out that there are 29 of them. We have 11 amphibian species, 7 mammals, 6 birds, 3 reptiles, and 2 fish. As you can see, we have this table divided by state, and I'll take this opportunity to explain to the people that are not familiar with this situation that in the United States, every state has a level of autonomy in regards to how it governs itself. And so, as you can see, there is a national or federal Species Endangered Act, but then there's also one for each single state. So even if a species is present in 2 or more of these states, it might be listed in only one, or it might be listed in all of them. And so that's why we keep dividing these results by state. But as you can see, we have both Endangered Species Act listed species, and then we also have special concern ones. And so these are species to keep an eye on, so to speak. They haven't made it to the official thing, but they are there. Now, why is this important to identify? Well, barred owls are preying on these species, and these are species that are already threatened by a whole different suite of environmental stressors. So some of these species are being threatened by other invasive species, such as American bullfrog. Some of them are threatened by climate change. Some of them are threatened by small population sizes, habitat loss and degradation. And then on top of all these things, now you have barred owls preying on them. Before I finish this part, I've been talking about prey this whole time, but there is also an indirect effect on predators. So keep in mind that at this point, all of these barred owls are competing for resources with any other predator in the landscape that feeds off of these animals. And some of those predators are endangered themselves. So a species of martin and a species of fisher in the Pacific Northwest are already endangered. And now you have the barred owl coming in, competing with them for prey resources. And so with everything that we have presented today, we want you to take away some important general ideas. The first one, that Southern California spotted owls require immediate action, but we don't know what type of action because the situation is extremely dire. Barred owls do function as an invasive species in their expanded range. I've shown you all the negative impacts that they have on these ecosystems. We have plenty of data that shows that barred owls will drive spotted owls to extinction if we don't manage them. And furthermore, with this diet metabarcoding study, we have shown that barred owls have the potential to affect both predator and prey communities. They do consume many at-risk species, adding another stressor to them already. and that in general, molecular methods can be used to answer ecological, biogeographic, and evolutionary questions, and if necessary, they can also inform conservation and management decisions. Mm.
So for what's in the future for our genomics research, we have several studies down the line and planned. And barred owls, as we mentioned, Daniela said we get all these samples, and so these removals are helping us answer a lot of questions. And barred owls make a great model for spotted owls. So we are looking at contaminants on the landscape, particularly rodenticides. And normally to do those methods, you need to use the liver, which is not possible in a spotted owl because they are endangered. We do not want to take the liver. But barred owls, which are inhabiting the same areas, make a great model to look at how these contaminants are spread out on the landscape, how they're being ingested, and also how this can change the expression of different genes and impact the survival of a species. We also want to look at movement across the landscape using genomics, hopefully seeing if there are any barriers to resistance of dispersal across the landscape. And finally, a research intern in our lab, Hermary Gonzalez, is finishing a really interesting study on the diet of spotted owls. So she's using a non-invasive method to collect diet and prey DNA from both the talons and the beaks of both California and northern spotted owl, and using metabarcoding to understand what both the adults and sub-adults are eating. And to do this, she is using samples from our barred owl removal studies as well, because she is using both swabs and intestinal contents with metabarcoding to make sure and verify that these methods are comparable. And this is great because if this works out, then we have a way now where we can look at diet of spotted owls and look at that over time and how they may change. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for listening to us and also the wide array of collaborators that we have to get this work done, and also any of the future collaborators that we plan on working with. So thank you.
Do I stop sharing, Carla?
Yep,
Or
you can stop sharing now.
okay.
Thank you very much for that immense amount of information. I know we have some questions coming in already. And one of them was about sharing links to the articles and studies that you're referring to. Those are on your lab website? Is that the link that we had? So
Yes.
Joe and somebody in YouTube, if you could post the link to their research at the Peary lab, then you can find links to kind of all the rest of that massive amount of information.
Yes, under publications for the lab in general, you'll see, yeah, everything. It stays up to date, so there is plenty there.
Excellent. Joe, Joe and I are going to alternate back and forth going through the Q&A that's been entered in Zoom, and Tristan's going to be forwarding questions from YouTube to me. So Joe and I will sort through questions and throw those to Emily and Daniela. Take turns doing that. You want to go first, Joe?
Sure. This one says the southeastern part of the USA has an abundance of barred owls. Has the higher population of barred owls in the southeastern area of the US, with more land where the barred owls live being developed, is that forcing barred owls to head west into the spotted owl territory? And could that be a factor?
Okay, well, that is a very good point and a very interesting question. I don't know if it has been officially tested as a hypothesis, but clearly I mean, this is something we're seeing recently with all these changes that humans are doing to the landscape is that species are moving as a response to it. So whether they're moving to track better climate, that's one thing. They also, some of them move to track better habitat. And so definitely if in the native range, barred owls are getting pushed out by urbanization and other types of development, then yeah, they are highly mobile, and we now know they are very capable of moving to new areas. So that might definitely be a factor.
Okay, and questions about any efforts made to relocate any of the subspecies to other geographic regions less affected by urbanization, warmer temps, and wildfires?
That is a great question and something that we pondered a lot. And in California, and also with Mexican spotted owl, there haven't been any translocations attempted. But in British Columbia and Canada, there was a captive rearing of northern spotted owls with the intent to release them after that. And it did not work well. The spotted owls that were released did not survive for very long. And there's also, beyond that, there's also evidence that owls, because they are territorial, often when you translocate them, they come back again. So it really hasn't been tried, but the chance of success of doing that is probably really low. There's been some ideas mentioned that maybe if you could take eggs from a nest and move them somewhere else, there would be a less chance of them trying to fly back. Where, that may be successful, but also particularly with Southern California, that population is so inbred at this point, so genetically distinct. It might be more of a danger of adding those deleterious mutations back into a healthy population. So whereas there's a lot of ideas, I'm not sure anyone's really come up with something that is going to be effective.
Here's a very fraught question. What makes spotted owls more valuable to us than barred owls?
Uh, I guess I'll try to answer, and it's not that they are more valuable. I believe that, I guess, something I would like to make clear is that as biologists and scientists, we like all species. We believe barred owls are beautiful. And if there was another way, we would really love to do something different than lethal removals. But to get back to that question, it's not that spotted owls are more valuable, is that they are valuable, period. And so we need to do something, excuse me, to help them. And this is a problem that was created by humans. And so we should be doing something about it. Um, yeah, I don't, it is, and again, it's a difficult topic, is a sensitive one, and it's not black and white. It's not that one is more valuable than the other one. These are all living organisms. We should strive to conserve them all. And we know barred owl populations are doing perfectly fine, especially in the native range. And so we still need to do something about spotted owls. We cannot just abandon them to their fate, kind of thing. But it's not easy. It's not an easy topic. And next week, there's another talk about this and about management with Janice, and I'm sure perhaps these topics about the management of barred owls, she'll have even more data and tools to answer those questions.
We kind of talked about it doesn't really work to move the inbred ones, but are there Are there any thoughts whatsoever what can be done to help that severely inbred population?
Yeah, it is such a difficult situation, and it's really hard to talk about thinking of this species as is it actually just functionally extinct already? And in terms of the genetics, and even with that field work of only finding Josh, 6 months, only finding 21 of them out there, it's hard to imagine there being a way to have a genetic rescue for these individuals. There's the idea of genetic outbreeding, which means that when you introduce um, genetic material to a population that's so different, you actually can cause that population to decline and experience a crash. And that is a big fear because Sierra Nevada, as we showed, that's very different. It's very distinct. And introducing anything from Southern California could actually cause a bigger problem for the Sierras, which they're already in decline. There could be a look at if there are any healthy individuals genetically in Southern California that perhaps there would be a way to start a program of breeding, controlled breeding, some type of situation where you know which individuals you are putting together. But then that also comes into the logistics of what happened in British Columbia with the captive rearing program. So I always struggle with the fact that what do we do? Because you're not going to stop LA from growing. It's going to be there. The habitat, the wildfires are just immense there. Climate change is horrible there. And I tend to think is the only way we go to even more advanced genetic techniques. People are looking at things like CRISPR-Cas9, which allows you to edit genes and potentially take away things that are deleterious. It's some things people have considered for conservation, but that comes with a risk as well, because there are so few left in Southern California, and these are new techniques. They're emergent. We don't know how well they would work. And so you would be putting at risk species that are already so in so much decline. And I wish there was an easy, happy answer to be able to save them in Southern California.
I'm gonna combine a couple of different people's questions because they talk about the same thing. Um, One person says, I've read they're also killing hybrid owls, part spotted and part barred. How can they tell that they're hybrids? And if it's true that they hybridize, what's the future of this barred owl? Will it be considered an invasive species?
Um, Emily, chime in if maybe I got this wrong, but my understanding is that those hybrids look actually as a combination of a bar and spotted owl. So I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember exactly where is it, but I believe the patterns on the back are those of a barred owl, and then in the front, well, they have the spots, so to speak, on the feathers. And so morphologically, they can tell the difference between them. And I want to reiterate, these are biologists that have been working with spotted owls for years and decades. And so for us, they might look too similar. Believe me, it doesn't for them. It's just they are so highly trained that um, it is not it is not an issue for them. And then the second part of the question about what this hybridizing means for the future of it. It is not ideal in the sense that kind of like jumping to the end of the story, everything in the West Coast becomes a hybrid, so you don't have spotted owls anymore, like clear spotted owls, and you don't have clear barred owls anymore, you just have hybrids of it, then you have lost genetic diversity. You still lost a species. And we don't want that. We want to try to conserve as much of the diversity that exists in the world nowadays. And so, uh, even if they all turn hybrids for some reason, it is not ideal. Well, perhaps they will not be called an invasive species, I would think, but still is not a good outcome.
And I'll just add a little bit to what Daniela said, is that the hybrids do have a different call. So through our bioacoustics work, we have seen that the call of the hybrid is different. And so that has helped us a lot when it comes to the removals. And there's never been a single instance where a owl was removed and they suspected of it being a hybrid and it was not a hybrid. They are all hybrids that have gotten removed or pure barred owl. But in terms of what's the future for these hybrids, genetically, we know hybridization is happening. We know it's happened over more than one generation. So we are able to use genomes, look at this, see that there's a first generation hybrid. That hybrid is able to breed and it back crosses with either a barred owl or a spotted owl. And as they back cross these hybrids, they very quickly morphologically look like whoever their parents are. So they will start to very quickly look like a barred owl again, look like a spotted owl, and that's even genetically. And so chances again of accidental removal of a hybrid, once it becomes further generations down, they become so genetically similar to their parent again that there's probably going to be little chance of mistaking it for the wrong species. The bigger chance is we didn't know it was a hybrid, and so it's still on the landscape.
And I just have to say, I've heard one of those first generation spart owl hybrids. Whoa, do they
Yep.
sound weird. I mean, just wacko.
Yeah, the spectrogram looks absolutely different. Like there is no way you can mistake that for either a spotted or a barred. It is its own unique thing.
Yeah. Could you talk about the effect of barred owl population increases on Western screech owl population specifically?
So there has been work done in our lab on Western screech owl. We do know it is affecting the community of forest owls and causing declines. I am not in the best position to talk about that study because it's been done by others. And unfortunately, my strong suit is very much in genomics. But definitely on our website, you can find the publications to that. And I can say with certainty that all studies on forest owls, they are impacting them, and barred owls are eating Western screech owls. So that also is a big impact there on population decline because they are being preyed upon.
Is there any evidence from the genomic data that Mexican spotted owls could become better adapted to climate change than the other subspecies?
You know, with Mexican spotted owl, it's hard because there is the amount of work that's been done genetically is a lot less than what it has been on the other subspecies. So even for our work, it was the first time we had full genomes of Mexican spotted owls. And so it's hard to talk about adaptability without having more data. And ways to look at adaptability, we mentioned transcriptomics and using, which genes are expressed or not. And that is a good way to determine if they would be more adaptable. It's good that they do have gene flow between populations. That means that they are breeding, and there's genetic exchange between those populations. So nothing negative is becoming fixed, which could indicate they might have more adaptability. I would say that Mexican spotted owl, if anybody out there is researching them or wants to genetically, they desperately need it. I would advocate for that. And I would say that knowing, particularly with the pyrocene, that and climate change, we found using transcriptomics that other species are able to adapt faster than what we thought they could. It would be really amazing with any of the spotted owl subspecies if somebody would look at that and let us know how adaptable and quickly they can evolve to changes.
Okay, so this one is comment going into a question. So this is a person that lives in California and said the Berry et al. Paper used the CNDDB to check for spotted owl locations in Southern California, but it ignored numerous records from eBird, many of which are in locations that weren't checked by Berry et al. In their surveys. Some of the territories in eBird from the last 25 years appear to be empty based on their own informal surveys, but there are several that were occupied in 2025 that Berry et al. Missed. And then this person goes into regarding the genetics of spotted owls from Southern California, over what time interval were the samples obtained? Just wondering if there's sufficient time resolution to detect changes, say if some samples were from the 1960s versus the 2010s.
Yeah, so, Josh was unfortunately unable to get to every location. So he did sample a lot of them. It, would be great if the field work and that demography can keep going, because a lot of our collaborators have mentioned, changes they have seen on the habitat, changes in numbers of spotted owls they detected. But we have heard from others who have monitored spotted owls in Southern California in areas that we weren't able to get to, that the numbers are declining, particularly since times of like 2016, where surveys have been conducted in other areas, the numbers are declining. For time range, some of our samples actually were museum specimens that were collected from areas where spotted owls are in Southern California, have for many years been considered gone extinct from. So Cuyamaca, Palomar Mountains, it's been a long time since anybody has seen them there. And so we were able to include somewhat of a time series. These other samples for a lot of places were from around like between 2020 to 2022. And so we did get, I guess, somewhat of an idea of what might have already been lost due to time. And if to go back to the figure that showed where there was distinct genetic populations and isolations, Cuyamaca and Palomar, where they are extinct, were actually considered genetically the same as like San Bernardino, San Jacinto, and the San Gabriels. So there definitely is, at least historically, and from some areas they went extinct, that genetic signature is still there on the landscape. But in other populations where Josh did survey intensely, there isn't any evidence that we were missing any of that genetic diversity. For time frame, we were able to get somewhat of a time series. Unfortunately, with the type of marker that we use, to get anything that would be recent within like the last 10 years, the last decade, we wouldn't be able to get that kind of resolution.
Well, the question I was going to ask just popped up. Um, if we decided to spend taxpayer dollars on trying to fix every problem resulting from human actions, we would not get very far. So why is this action against barred owls compelling enough to expend so much money, time, and effort? I think you kind of covered this in an earlier answer, but it's enough of a different question that I figured I'd
Yeah,
ask.
and that is okay. I mean, once again, I believe this is something that probably Janice can answer in next week's webinar with more info, with more data. Um, I mean, if I had to say, if I had to pick a reason uh, without taking away any importance from other issues generated by humans that we need to take care of, this one here, I think the key here is it's the urgency with which it needs to happen. And so it's just a matter of years, maybe a few decades. And if nothing gets done, you saw the graphs, you saw the trends. If we don't do anything, we're just talking no spotted owl. They are gonna go extinct in the coming decades. And so why this one? Because if it doesn't happen now, that's it. We're out of time. We're out of time when it comes to spotted owls. And so that will be the reason for me of why this one should be getting attention right now and something being decided soon.
And also, we have a chance to be proactive. We know that they are still expanding. We know that they're moving through California, and we know these removals work. And with a lot of changes that humans have caused on the landscape, we mostly have to be reactive. We have to respond after things have already gotten dire and try and recover from what we've done. And in this case, we often talk about the precautionary principle, and that is used to say that if a negative outcome is going to be expected from the species, we should intervene and intervene before it gets too late and we have to try and react. And I think that's a really important thing here, is that we have a chance before it's too late, before it's just scrambling to change what's already happened.
Okay, this person, I'm going to throw in one thing they said, and then there's a question, follow-up question. Noting that the reproductive rates of barred owl and spotted owl are quite different. So the barred owls can have 2 to 3 young every year, while the spotted owls are producing 1 to 2 young every other year, or maybe even less. So they're outproducing them also. So then the follow-up question is, do you know how far the young spotted owls disperse? Or is that a question for Janice next week?
I can talk about some research that was done by a student in our lab, Whitney. She put trackers on juvenile barred owls from the Mendocino area in California. And she found that as subadults, when they start to disperse, they are dispersing very large distances. Their home ranges are much bigger than expected, and they are bigger than what has been seen in their native range. So we know juveniles, when they, as fledged, they are going long distances. Some preliminary data from a genetic study that we are currently conducting, looking at dispersal across the landscape, particularly in California. We have found that we looked at different generations. We detected related individuals over multiple generations, and we found that there are instances of owls on the coast who have kind of made it into the Sierras. And so and to put that into perspective for people who aren't familiar with California, Mendocino to the Sierras is just in between. There's a huge area of unsuitable habitat that's just all agriculture. There's no real trees. So they kind of have to go north and then move over to get back down into the Sierras. So they can move and disperse over long distances. And there has been, I've talked to a couple other people who have looked at this, there is an idea that potentially they actually also disperse north again for ones that are born kind of like in that southern, like Mendocino Sierras, and then individuals from the north are kind of dispersing more south and pushing the edge forward. Like I said, that's just from conversation, so I don't know. There hasn't been any research specifically showing that, but I guess it's kind of like an anecdotal thing that people are considering.
And then was there any data about how far the juvenile spotted owls disperse? I assume they're not going far.
They're not going very far, no.
We have three different people asking, so this must be an important question. Will this barred owl cull have to be continued in perpetuity? And if it is, that's a lot of barred owls to kill. And why not restrict it to the more isolated Sky Island populations and more um, like necessary areas?
Okay, so yes, this is one of the criticisms to the plan is because of the high densities that we're seeing, is this gonna have to happen in perpetuity? And the answer really, because is yes, most likely, with some caveats here. So to address the last part of the question regarding like more key areas, the range of the barred owl has not made it into Southern California. And so the Sky Islands, that area does not apply here. We're talking the Sierras on the eastern side of the state, and then the west coast down to about the San Francisco Bay Area. That's where barred owls are right now. So yes, this plan will have to be in place for many, many years because there is basically an unlimited source of barred owls coming in from Canada. And there's nothing we can do about that at this point. But the point that I want to make here is that once you get barred owls densities to a certain point that is low enough, it becomes much easier to manage. And so there is going to be a lot of work needed up front, but then after that work is done, it shouldn't be as time consuming, labor consuming, and in that sense, money, dollar consuming to manage these barred owls once you get them to low enough density. Because we know from the work done in the Sierras, which is a low density area, that even after those removals in 2019, recolonization of barred owls is not really an issue. It's not like it happens really fast. It's not that all of a sudden all these sites get occupied again. No, they have been going back to these areas and they find maybe one, two owls, barred owls. And so that will become much easier to manage in the future. And again, with the support of things like this passive acoustic monitoring program, you don't even need to have people on the field doing constant surveys. You could have these recording units deployed, and whenever a barred owl gets detected, then you send someone to the area to do something about it. And so because of the unlimited source from Canada, yes, we are looking at a long-term program, but keep in mind, it's not going to be 500,000 barred owls all the time. Like it's not gonna stay like that in those big numbers.
I think this is a really important question to ask. Have other species experienced and survived similar genetic bottlenecks, like Ice Age or whatever, with low heterozygosity like this?
Yes, I think one big example that is the cheetah. And so for the longest time, everybody thought the cheetah, the diversity is so low, there's going to be this huge problem. They're not going to be able to adapt. What are we going to do with the cheetah? And cheetahs are endangered. I'm not saying they are not by mentioning this story, but what they ended up finding out by doing all of this past demographic modeling is that that crash in diversity and population size actually occurred back in the Pleistocene. So it was a remnant of what happened a long time ago that they were seeing, and they were managing based off of something that occurred way back in the Pleistocene instead of managing for what was affecting the population currently as much. And so it's a kind of leads to why, the importance of understanding what happens back in the Pleistocene, back in these long times, so that we can see there may be low genetic diversity, but if that is a remnant from a long time ago, that may not be as important to try and increase heterozygosity for the survival of this population if it's been going for so long. Maybe there are other things to put the efforts into, like population connectivity and habitat and things like that, rather than increasing genetic diversity.
What tissue from spotted owls is used to do the genomic analysis?
So we used blood. That is the easiest and safest to be able to take from spotted owls in the field. Very little blood is taken, and it's sometimes very difficult to do the work we're doing because the sample of blood that we have is so small. It's generally under what you would normally use for doing genetics. But we really try and make sure that when we are taking these biosamples from the spotted owl, that there is no danger to the owl whatsoever. So we err on the side of taking too little rather than too much.
Okay, we have hit 3 o'clock. There's still more questions that we didn't get to, but since we're going to be covering barred owl management next week, I'm hoping those of you that we didn't get to your questions will join us next week to learn more about that, and we can ask Janice Reed some of those questions also. So a huge thank you to Emily Fountain and Daniela Arenas for joining us and sharing all this information, even though it isn't wonderful, happy, joy kind of stuff. But it's things we all need to understand to really grasp what's going on with this issue, because there's no way the media can share this level of information to help really understand what's going on. And it's not a fun situation. There's not a happy answer to a lot of this. So a big thank you to everybody that's here watching, because you are taking the time to learn more and understand what's going on. Very much appreciated. Please share the information with other people. This is being recorded, so you can refer people back to this recording and our other ones on the topic of barred owl, spotted owl things. And thanks to all who made donations to help support this so we can keep it free so everybody can be learning from this. And so next week's presentation is titled Managing Barred Owls to Save the Spotted Owl, a long-standing conservation tool, with Janice Reed. And she spent more than 30 years studying the northern spotted owl in Western Oregon with the Pacific Northwest Research Station. So she's more of a field person and might be able to answer some of those other questions that that Emily and Daniela had a little less experience with. But certainly you know the folks out in the field who are doing this stuff, so I know you've been talking to them about it. So thank you again very, very, very much
Thank you for the invitation.
for
Yes,
sharing.
thank you.
And thanks everybody for coming on a Sunday afternoon. Hope to see you next week. Have a good rest of your day or night, wherever